Welcome to the American Diversity Report podcasts, where we interview movers and shakers and diverse change makers. And we partner with the Systemic Diversity and Inclusion LinkedIn group, created by Joseph Nwe, to provide a platform for panels to share their expertise. I'm Deborah Levine, Editor-in-Chief of the American Diversity Report, award-winning author of 14 books, and moderator of today's panel. And before I introduce you to the panel, please welcome Dr. Joseph Nwe. In addition to creating this group, he is president of the Diversity Frontier and a diversity and inclusion consultant with unique ability to address unconscious bias and inclusive leadership. He is also the author of 3 books, including the most recent, Cultivating a Belief System for All. Welcome. Hi, Joseph.
Thank you very much, Deborah, and thank you for moderating this panel. I want to first of all thank.
It's a pleasure to partner with you, and I'd love it if you would tell us how you came to create this and what your goal is for this panel.
Well, my goal for this panel is to express to them the mission of the diversity, systemic diversity group, and to hopefully have them involved, because in this platform, we focus on sharing ideas, enriching each other, supporting one another in whatever capacity we can, and in whatever field members are. We also believe in engaging them and profiling them on various things that they're doing, especially those that reflect our vision and addressing the issues of equity and social justice for all. Those are the type of things we welcome them to do, and we are partnering with the American Society of Diversity in order to propel us, because they say when we put 2 heads together, we do better job. So that's essentially what we are doing, and when you get in there, try to get involved. And I don't want to take much time doing this, but I want to say special thank you to all of you coming, particularly Lois, who is joining us from London. I'm going to question Dr. Chukuma why he's not here, why somebody's from England and from all over the places are here. So I'll raise my.
Well, let's see if we, when we finish introducing those who are here, if our additional member will be able to join us. But let's start at the moment with Atina Hensch. She is a diversity and inclusion consultant who began her career as an interpreter and understands the challenges of marginalized groups, including refugees. She's traveled and lived on several continents and works in government and corporate sectors on cross-cultural communication. We will be back with you with some questions. Next, we have Louise Duffield, who is Vice President of Executive Search at Gated Talent. She holds several law degrees and is a disability advocate for the C-suite. And we have questions for you. The next person is going to be Reginald Hairston, who is a United States Marine Corps colonel, scheduled to retire shortly from active duty after 30 years of service. His passion is to teach young leaders how to lead in a way that embraces diversity and inclusion. And we will be back with you. Each of these wonderful people has a very different background, but has a passion for diversity and has dedicated themselves to it. So we're going to start with some questions about their background, and then we'll look at trends for the future. So starting with you, Atina, my question for you, given your experiences and travel, how do you define diversity and inclusion?
Great. Thank you so much for having me here. I really appreciate and appreciate being among such amazing people. I think one of the things that more and more is coming to place is the concept of the inclusion. And in 80s and 90s, we very much focus on the aspect of diversity, is having within the organization, with our society, with our community, having people from all walk of life, having different backgrounds, for example, persons with disability, women, different ethnicity and race. But one of the things that more and more we're realizing is that diversity by itself is not going to be the ultimate goal, because what we need to focus is about the inclusion part of it, and how everybody feels included within the organization, and how the organization itself can have policy and a strategy in place in order to nurture that inclusion, that inclusive diversity. So that is one of the things that I have come across very much in the past. When I had the job title, it was diversity and inclusion officer, manager, or whatever. But now more and more I'm coming to the concept that we actually need to focus on the inclusion part of it, which is about valuing every individual within the organization, and every individual feels that they belong to the organization, the sense of belonging, and each of them, they bring the unique ability, the unique who they are within the organizations. And diversity is here, is the mix, but how to make that mix works is the inclusion. So to me, diversity and inclusion goes together, but is it to me what I'm gathering is that it's more important to look at the inclusion first, and how to make sure that everybody within the organization, within the community, within our society or schools, they feel they belong to the society, to that particular community or organizations, is the sense of belonging, which is the inclusion.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that very definite background of how we got to be here, where we want to go, should be, and I have a feeling others will be agreeing with you. Louise, let's hear from you about your view of diversity. And you have a very special perspective concerning disabilities. And I wondered, why is the C-suite deficient in disability awareness, and what does that mean for the company?
Okay, so I think one of the comments that was just said before was that it's about really promoting inclusion. When I think of diversity, I think of us just ticking boxes on one of those forms. But inclusion is so important, and fundamentally what we see in the C-suite is there's no real kind of recognition for disability, no disability agenda. Typically it's not seen or heard of within the media as a priority, and it's kind of absent from board level discussions globally, and there's a lot of evidence that actually supports this. And in fact, I follow a group called the Valuable 500, and they did a survey. The survey went across 17 countries globally, and they interviewed a number of kind of C-suite executives, and this survey basically concluded that, you know, over half of those executives who did it said that, you know, disability was rarely discussed on their leadership agendas. And really, to somebody like myself with disability, that didn't come as a surprise. I think the reasons for those results are really attached. There is still a stigma attached to disability in a C-suite, and I also think that there's a lack of understanding.
I would agree, absolutely. I had a brother with who had what we call high Asperger's syndrome,
Yes.
an autistic condition, but very smart. And it was not an easy life. Thank you for your input.
Thank you.
Reggie. All right.
Yes, how are you doing?
Hello. So
I believe,
I
I'm
have
sorry,
a
did you
question
ask me a
for you.
question?
I do. And it's going to, your answer is going to start just like that.
Okay.
How has the Marine Corps taught you to embrace diversity? And how did it create the foundation of your leadership strategies? 30 years must have done something for you.
Yeah, a lot has changed over a 30-year period, just a 30-year life in general. But when I first began as a Marine 30 years ago, I came in with a very narrow, self-centered view. I was more focused on the me than I was on the team. Well, the one great thing about the military is you are now cast into a situation where people from all different backgrounds come together and have to figure out how to make it work. So what the Marine Corps taught me very quickly was I had to step away from just the focus on myself and learn how to focus on others. But I think we still, as a whole, have a narrow view of diversity. And it's always or normally associated with a physical attribute. And we miss the diversity of thought. Yeah. And so if you don't have a leader who understands how to include a diversity of thought philosophy, then you miss out on a lot of things you could do to improve your organization, to accomplish your mission. So over time, when I started to realize that sometimes the biggest problem in the room was myself, and learned how to start taking a deep look at myself and realize that people will follow a leader who actually cares about them. So for my foundation, it truly is no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. I've seen it work over and over. It can be taught, but in order to be taught, you first must have the individual do like I did, be able to step back and realize as a leader, I have a lot to learn, and it costs to be a leader. It costs time, it costs emotion, you have to physically invest, and you won't find anybody who is in a leadership position who doesn't think they are, a good leader already. But somebody has to be able to let them see that maybe you aren't as good as you thought you were. Marine Corps taught me that, because the Marine Corps has no problem letting you know where you fall short.
Thank you. I can only imagine 30 years of military service. My dad had a few years in the World War II, but it shaped him. Just that small amount of time shaped him, right? So thank you. It's interesting in all of your different perspectives, how much respect you have for the diversity among us, and a personal passion for it. And I really think that that's necessary for those of us who want to work in this field. And I wonder, what is it going to look like as we move forward? And many of you have particular roles. Some of you are going to be starting new projects. But all of us are looking at a world, an environment that is rapidly changing. It is difficult to wrap your mind around in a day, never mind for next year or the next few years. But having said that, I'd like to have your take, each one of you, on what you think is going to be your biggest challenge in the next year or so. Let's start with you, Atina.
I think one of the biggest challenge is that, for example, because different countries, they have, for example, in Europe, I'm considering and thinking about, because many countries, they have different approach to diversity. For example, it was mentioned about taking the statistic on persons with disability. For instance, in Switzerland, we actually have legislation that we cannot even take those statistics. And I think that one of the biggest challenges that really having basically grounds and saying that, okay, it's important also to take in the statistic as well as how we are going to practice inclusion within the organization, within the society. I think so that's one of the biggest challenge that I see within Europe, because when it comes to diversity and inclusion, countries, they don't have very common ground, very similar kind of approach. Or for example, when it comes to gathering data, there is not sufficient legislation, or some countries such as Switzerland, they do not allow to some of the statistics to be gathered. So that's one of the challenge that I see. And the other challenge I see in terms of the organizations is that sometimes they don't know where to start from. For example, the low-hanging fruit for many organizations, it's about gender. And when it's supposed to go a little bit further, it just stuck there. For example, I did a particular study on employment retention and reasonable accommodation for persons with disability in Geneva, and particularly I did a focus on one of the organization. And one of the things that I was coming back into is that sometimes, or very often, it really stops at the gender. For example, later on we or for example the other areas such as LGBTI, ethnicity, is just doesn't get there, and we don't get there enough to actually to look at the challenges that what are the minority groups or refugees are facing when it comes to employment, or persons with disability when it comes to reasonable adjustments or retention. So there are kind of, those are the area that I would see in the next 1 year. It's a challenge actually helping organization to go beyond just one dimension of inclusive diversity and focusing further.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Interesting that Switzerland does not allow data collection. I hadn't thought about that. Appreciate your sharing that. Louise, what are your major challenges in the coming year?
I think I would have to say one of the major challenges, and this was touched upon just a moment ago, is really it goes back again to the awareness, and the awareness at the top comes from the top of these organisations, especially the large organisations, and it goes all the way down, and particularly within HR departments with disability, for example. And you mentioned after we spoke before about Asperger's and autism, you know, and I can say with somebody who has an invisible disability, this is a big challenge because many HR departments, even senior HR professionals, senior leaders, they have no clear understanding of how to promote and see value in people with these long-term conditions. And one thing I see is it's almost like people are written off if they don't comply with a kind of norm. And it's such a shame because, for example, I have ADHD, and with somebody with ADHD, typically we're quite creative people. That's one of our key strengths. And I've led a number of positions where I've developed businesses successfully, but you know, to go to another organisation and apply for a role there and say, you know, hey, I've got a disability and it's invisible, that's a big step. That's a really big step. And it's a massive challenge for anybody out there, especially if you're looking for a senior management or leadership type role. And you do worry, am I going to be tainted by this? You know, and that's what I see. I think we really need more awareness and support with this.
Thank you. I so agree. Oh, my goodness. It's an admirable goal to work for. Thank you.
Thank you.
Reggie, what is it that you expect to be encountering as your major challenge in the next year? It must be an interesting adventure.
Adventure is the right way of putting it. So as I transitioned from the military, again, I spent my entire adult career in uniform. So one of the challenges I will face is just understanding the other side of the uniform. And I think I do, right? But just like somebody saying they understand the military, but they haven't been in it, I recognize I'm not that guy saying I understand the other side, but I haven't been in it fully. So a challenge is making sure that I am completely open to learning new things. I believe that where we are sort of falling short at this point and where I can help, I think as a society, we are becoming more exclusive vice inclusive. We're going the wrong way. Now, it may just be what I see on TV, and it may not be a true depiction of what's really going on, but what I see is what shapes how I see, right? And so I'm trying to figure out, how do we go from a place of conversation to action to results that can be measured to strategies that can then be fed back in at the leadership level? Because once the leaders buy in, and that's the key, leadership begins and ends everything. Once the leadership buys in, and not just because in the United States, not just because you feel like you are forced to do it. No, I have to check the block. We've had diversity training. We've had training X, Y, Z. So and before I finish, let me just say, before it gets misinterpreted, everything I'm saying is a reflection of me and not the Marine Corps. That's my commercial. So the challenge for me going forward, I think, and always will be, is ensuring I keep my mind open to learning and finding out new things about myself and the people around me.
Thank you. Thank you. I think the lifelong learning issue is with all of us, because things are changing so rapidly, and it's part of our job is to keep learning about the cultures, about how to communicate, how to deal with different groups. One of the things that has come up recently, or at least into the great visibility, is the unconscious bias thing, where people need to learn and unlearn things in order to work in a diverse world that they're not that aware of. And we've talked about that in terms of disability, in terms of changing cultures. This issue of unconscious bias is something that several of you mentioned in your interview form. And I'd like to explore this a bit. What is your perception of the role of unconscious bias regarding the efforts to be inclusive? Is it on a range from 1, not much, to 10, it's everything? Where would you put it? Atina.
Yeah, I think unconscious bias has a big role on every decision that we do. Whatever that we do, no matter if it is from the organization, working within the organization, or from individual circumstances or individual decision that we make, is all rolled by of implicit bias. And because the thing is that the way that our brain is wired, because we have the amygdala, and the part of the brain makes the decision fight and flight, and very often we based on that make a decision. For example, the concept of the name, or the concept of the smell, or concept of reactions, and makes us to a quick judgment and quick decision making, which is related to the concept of the bias. And I think one of the aspects is that to recognize, first of all, that we all have the bias. And when we recognize we all have bias, and think about the strategy, how I can, for example, better educate myself and work with my colleague or my subordinate in order to better decision making and strategically minimizing the bias, because we all have it and we know that we have it, and how to remove it to some stage is the important aspect. And I think one of the aspects that I'm very in favor of how to reduce the bias is the concept of, for example, in academia they call it contact theory, creating those atmosphere that, for instance, a younger intern woman is able to be mentored by someone's in a higher positions, for example, maybe a person in a leadership, a male person in the leadership, in order to actually see, okay, be connected to the next generations, to break the barrier of the age concept, and also at the same time for both generations to actually work together. That's one of the aspects of the mentorship program, to reduce the bias. Or for example, creating a safe place for people to have the conversation, and being advocate of others as well. So really working collaboratively in order to practicing inclusion helps us to remove the unconscious bias.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that happens when we talk about unconscious bias and what role it plays is it almost certainly goes to the issue of strategies to deal with it. So thank you very much. You've given us the mentoring, the collaboration, the different generations, different genders moving together to assist at least in managing it, if not removing it. Thank you. Louise, what do you have to say about that?
I guess obviously unconscious bias is something that we all have. It's shaped, by kind of various things. And I think, the media throughout growing up has played its part somewhat, I know with my kind of unconscious bias. But I guess what I tried to do to improve and kind of develop myself is to really kind of develop a habit of becoming kind of aware of it. So, if for example, I meet somebody and I can feel, that I may have this bias developing, just, trying to be aware of it, and also trying to, I guess, break it down and weaken it. I think it's so important that when you meet somebody for the first time, you try to look for similarities or experiences you share together. That's a good way of getting over unconscious bias, because then all of a sudden, your focus is somewhere else and it's almost like that kind of disappears. But I guess fundamentally, this is something that we all need to work on. There's enough evidence out there to say that unconscious bias does have an effect on diversity and inclusion in the workplace and hiring. But it's something we need to work on. And if you're not familiar with sort of culture and values and practices of people who aren't from the same background of yours, then go out and explore it. I mean, for instance, one of the best things I ever did when I worked as a sales manager is I went into central London and I worked for a store called Selfridges, and I worked for a cosmetics house where 60% of my customers were from Asia. I'd had no experience before of ever dealing with Asian customers because I'd worked in kind of remote areas and rural areas before. And it gave me a really kind of great insight into the culture and learning. And it wasn't just the Asian culture, there were other cultures as well. But fundamentally, I guess by having that experience, putting myself out there and kind of living and breathing other cultures and being open as well to it, I guess fundamentally, that's the only way you can kind of help, overcome them obstacles with unconscious bias.
Thank you. Thank you. It must have been an interesting experience. I'm delighted that you went purposefully for it, and more of us should do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Reggie, what do you think?
It's interesting because the very idea of unconscious bias is because it's unconscious, you're unaware of it, right? But you have it. I know everyone knows this. So what I have learned over time is to accept the fact that I have an issue, unconscious bias I'm not aware of now, and to remain open to, once I discover what it is, to change. The only way you can change is now be open to conversations with people. Like when I first came in, I mentioned in an earlier conversation today, I came from a small town. Come from a small town, you come from a narrow point of view in a lot of cases. So when I joined the Marine Corps, even when I went off to college, I already had a view on the role of women, the view of religion. If you talked about it, my way was the right way and the only way, because that's what I had been socialized to understand. But right away, I realized that I was smart enough, I think, to realize that it can't be true. I can't be the only smart person in the room, right? Everybody else can't be wrong and I'm right. So in dealing with other folks now, I spend a lot of time, especially with young Marine leaders. I spend a lot of time trying to make them come face to face with the fact that there is something about you that can change. And if you can find that change, then the impact you're going to have on those who follow you, you can't measure.
I love it. I love it. Thank you. Yes, you can't measure it. It's an amazing thing. And those of us who have been exposed to different cultures than what we were born into, we have adaptive skills we're probably also unconscious of, but we are able to deploy them. You know that I've done this work for many, many years, but I came from 24 square miles of semi-tropical island, talk about small town. And my Aunt Polly, who's 93, is always amazed at what I get to do. And it's wonderful adventure. But it also has a lot of difficulties, and increasingly today those difficulties are in the media, and I do hope that people will take this conversation and use it well, because what is going on out there requires us to be even more visible. I, for example, am the media chair for my city's Council Against Hate. And that's something that I feel very strongly about. This is what we're looking at in my world as a challenge for the coming years. I suspect we're all in the same boat on that one. So before we wrap up, I'd like to go to Joseph. Are you with us? Hello.
Yes, I am. Sorry.
It's all right. And I want you to think about how this all has been pulled together in this discussion, what people are saying, and what you take away from it. What do you think is going to be your biggest challenge in the coming year?
Well, I think that what all they are saying are consistent with what we are discussing. And I think the critical thing for me and for the Systemic Diversity Group is to further our engagement, to create a forum where people can engage with one another, share ideas like we've had today. We can see some things that we may have known or not know, see different techniques different people may have used, like Louise said, how she went to an Asian community and began to do something, and from there she learned something. We are all like that, just like Reggie indicated that he came from a small town and he thought his way is the only way. And when he learned, he tried to pass that on to other people. So what you're saying in our discussion today seemed to be consistent with my vision, because that's what actually had happened to a number of my students, and a lot of my students had changed from having misconception of people to really embracing them. One in point were two of my former students who became, initially they didn't see one another, but eventually one person was a best man for the other, and the other one was the best man for the other one. And they're doing very well now and with a relationship with other people. So by and large, I think this is a very healthy thing, and I would like them to continue. And then that's essentially what I will have to say.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yes, we are teachers. It's embedded in us to make a difference, to get people to see what we see and to learn ourselves. And this is what the goal is of this panel discussion, not just among ourselves, but for those who get to watch it. And I'm hoping that people will make comments and share their views in writing on LinkedIn and on the American Diversity Report, where this will also be. I encourage you to share the links, to share whatever you can with people and ask them, what do you think? What are your challenges going to be this coming year? Let's hear from them. Let's see what they say. And ask them, what do you think about unconscious implicit bias? How do you deal with it, and how are you planning on dealing with it in these difficult times? Start the conversation and let's keep on going. How's that sound?
Sounds good.
All right.
It's perfect.
Brilliant.
Well, there's one more item that I think Joseph would like to share about the American Diversity Report, and he is leading this new peer review committee. If you'd like to say a few words about that.
Sure. I've been partnering with Deborah for some time now, and American Diversity is, provides a platform for scholarly work for people sharing their experiences in various genre of writing. So I would encourage everyone to be participating and doing whatever you can. And should you want to have idea, always be free to bring those ideas together, because that's what enables us to grow. So we're really glad that you came.
Yes, there are more than 700 articles on the American Diversity Report from all over the world, from all different kinds of diverse situations. And because I'm me, I also include poetry. Should you be so inclined, I find that's a wonderful window into different cultures. Let's see what we can do. And as they say, onward and upward. Yes?
Yes, I'm all in.
All right.
Indeed.
I love it. I love it. Well, then, I hope to be hearing from you soon, all of you. Joseph, of course, thank you. Tina and Louise, Reggie, wonderful to have this time with you. Thank you.
Thank you
very
so
much.
much. Thank you so much.